That, friends, is Helen Juman. Give her a hand again. Helen, I love listening to that. In fact, that's what I think of when I think of camp meeting music. Before a meeting start, somebody on the piano like that, bringing life and joy and light to the people who are gathering. Welcome this Sabbath evening. It's been a good Sabbath day. Started about 24 hours ago. And it's been wonderful to be together with so many of you as friends. It's a delight to see you here again this evening. So I grew up in a home where Dad told us stories and Mom read us stories. We grew up loving stories. And I continue to hold that love near and dear to my heart to this very day. A story well told is a rare gem and something that can truly place in our hearts something that we'll never forget. And I have appreciated both Cherie and Stuart very much on that front. Just stories extremely well told. And it's been a delight to have both of you here all of this week. We think of you going home with sadness. We feel like you're part of our community now. So welcome again. Thank you again so much for the time that each of you has spent with us. Before I say more about this evening, let me say a couple of things about weeks to come. Next Saturday evening at this same time is, as you know, a ticketed concert. And friends, I hope you don't miss this. You have been here and worshiped many times when Anthony Leon has been part of our worship experience. And you know the incredible blessing that we have as he sings. When I listen to Anthony sing, I think, how can the strength of that voice come out of someone so effortlessly? It's just powerful and beautiful. And Sergio Leyva on the piano. And then more recently, Liam Thomas, a young man from here in our very midst, grew up in our Sabbath schools, and is a rare and gifted talent. And we're just delighted that we're going to have the three of them. So I hope that you will plan to join us next Sabbath evening for that. Next Friday evening, somebody from our own congregation, one of our media volunteers, is going to share a story with us that's a tough story, but a real story. Sometimes we don't know what happens to people around us in our own congregation. Brian Hartnell, who survived, somebody who was known as the Zodiac Killer. You remember that from years ago. We'll tell his story about that. Then 2 weeks from tonight, we will be at Drayson Center. We always have a lot of fun at Drayson Center. We do all kinds of things, from some just sitting and watching and enjoying, others swimming, others on the court, out on the field. It's an active, fun evening, outdoor volleyball, pickleball, which seems to be the sport of choice these days. We start with a worship together, some singing together, and then we have fun together as a church congregation. So there will be more to come in the last week, and we'll say more about that as the weeks go by. But it truly is a wonderful time to be in camp meeting together. And we're just grateful for all of those. It's a team effort who make it happen. One thing I can assure you about whatever it is that happens at Loma Linda University Church, whether it's worship or social, Vespers, music, it's a team effort. It is always a group that comes together to make it happen, and we're very grateful to our team. Why don't we, before we go any further and get into this evening's topic, why don't we bow our heads for a word of prayer? Lord, we live stories. Stories are the realities of our lives. Some are gripping, some are sobering, some are uplifting, some have all the elements mixed together in them. Some leave us with questions, at least until the story unwinds further. No doubt the story which we'll finish hearing this evening at a certain point left profound questions and feelings of great sorrow and uncertainty of what would come next. We're so thankful it ended as it did, and we're so thankful and appreciative to be able to listen to Stuart as he was deeply involved in it, tell it in a firsthand way. So bless us this evening. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. One thing I neglected to mention, after we finish this evening in here, we will go outside for a watermelon feed. We hope you'll join us there to eat, to enjoy, to talk, and to process some of what we hear this evening. So many of you were here last Sabbath evening. I don't know that everyone was. I just checked. I can only on my phone check one of the platforms. And for both Stuart and Cherie, there have been thousands of views. So I know that people are following not just here in the sanctuary or in the auditorium, but from a distance. So you're up to where we got to last Sabbath evening, Stuart. Both you and Cherie left us kind of on the cliff waiting for whatever it would be that would come next. And it leaves us kind of at a place, or left us kind of at a place last Sabbath evening of question and sorrow and waiting to hear what would come next. So we're delighted to welcome you back, Stuart. Welcome back here to our Loma Linda congregation, and we're going to listen with very attentive ears.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being here and following this very personal journey. I've given talks like this all around the world, but this has been the first opportunity that I've been able to actually combine talks with my lovely wife, Cherie, because while all this drama was happening, we had a very personal situation in our family with the birth of our second child. Which Cherie, in her story, dealt with. But like so many things, and as so many things that have painful starts, we're so blessed and thankful for the outcome. We also want to thank Randy and Janine and Anita and all of your staff, Zach up there for helping put this together. You never know what you're going to get when you come to a new forum, and there are always problems, and I really appreciate how hard Zach has worked at getting us back up and running. Because I left you last week with the trial, the commitment. And I spoke about during the second inquest, this young lady rang me. We were devastated because during that second inquest, evidence had been given by the Crown which seemed to be damning. There was no evidence of a dingo involvement, but really the most difficult obstacle for us to overcome was to answer the blood evidence, the blood that had been found in the car. And as that lady gave her evidence in court, we just wondered, how are we going to give an answer to that? And I received a call from this lady. She heard what was being reported. The witness was just outstanding. We just thought, wow. How are we going to find any chinks in her armour? But this lady, Trish, is just the shyest, most retiring person you can imagine, and she listened very carefully what was being reported, and she realised that the witness that we had been so profoundly worried about had chinks in the armour, and that's why she said, before you leave, make sure you tie her down to her work notes. And she made me go and get a copy of that Crown witness work notes showing all of the testing that she had done on the from the car, because when the Chamberlain car had been seized, she'd spent several days going over it, testing it, and what she said was she found not only blood, but she found that the blood was the blood of a baby because it contained fetal hemoglobin. How were we going to answer that? And of course, when I saw these work notes, they just looked like hieroglyphics to me. And so my first task when we came back from that proceeding was to meet with Trish, and she gave me a crash course in how to interpret these work notes. And what we discovered was, as we went through those work notes, that the work done by that witness was not as proficient as it should have been. The work notes clearly showed that she hadn't used proper procedures, hadn't put in proper controls. And then I had to go around the world, and eventually I found this man, Professor Barry Botcher, who was just up the road from me, 50 miles up the road. He was the professor at Newcastle University. We gave him a brief. This is what the Crown witnesses are saying. She's saying that she's got this reagent from Germany. She's tested it. It's quite specific. What she's getting is positive results showing that the staining in the car is from a little baby, a baby under the age of 6 months. We knew that there would probably be some blood staining in there, but we had no answer to it. But this man, Barry, was just terrific. He got the same reagents, he tested them, and so by the time the trial started, I was confident. I was confident that we had the best system in the world. We have a system very similar to yours. We have the jury system. But let me tell you, I was pretty naive because what you actually appreciate when you've been through the sort of ordeal and trial that I have is that our system, your system, is not the pursuit of truth. The adversarial system is a gladiatorial combat. It's the biggest guy versus the little guy. And when you're the little guy, you hang on to that presumption of innocence. That's your guide. But going into that trial, I was fairly confident that by the time people knew the evidence that we had, the evidence that we were able to show about the defect in the blood evidence, and of course, our ace card was Sally Lowe, the witness from Tasmania who was going to be able to say that she heard that baby cry when, under the Crown scenario of what had happened, the baby had to be dead. And so the trial got underway, but before it did, there was a complication. Because by the time the second inquest wound up, it was in February. We'd had an adjournment in December. I'd flown back down to Sydney, and I knew then, because of the incredible media coverage, that this was going to be a difficult task. And when I got off the plane, got into a taxi, it was just before Christmas, and the taxi driver said, "Have you done your Christmas shopping?" I said, "No, I haven't." He said, "What you've got to get is one of those Azaria dolls." I said, "Oh, Azaria dolls." I knew he didn't know who I was. I said, "What does the Azaria doll do?" He said, "The Azaria doll," he said, "you cut its head off and it says, 'Mummy did it, Mummy did it.'" And you've got to understand that taxi drivers are the barometer of your society. What they're actually saying is a pretty true indication of the sentiment out there. But after we went back to the second inquest, and we adjourned then, and the Chamberlains were committed for trial, Lindy came and spoke to us privately and said, "Look, Michael and I would really like to start and have a child. Is that going to be a problem?" Well, this was February. We were told the trial was going to be in April, and so we said, "No, that's not an issue. You're not even going to be showing." We did not want a situation where we were going to go to a trial with someone obviously pregnant. But as it turned out, that wasn't what happened. One of the Crown witnesses kept delaying things, and in the end, the trial did not start until September of that year. And so by September of that year, Lindy was over 8 months pregnant. And this was, again, a big talking point and a big speculative area for the media. The supporters of Lindy saw it as the act of ultimate faith, but most of the public saw this as a desperate attempt for a lady to gain sympathy, thinking that if she was pregnant, a jury was not going to convict her. And so on the start of that trial morning, we walked in knowing that we were going to have a battle. I was one of four, and as we walked in, I was amazed because before the doors of the court were witnesses, members of the public wearing these T-shirts. And of course, immediately we complained to the judge, and they were taken off, and they were threatened with contempt of court. But it didn't help the start of it. But the beginning of the trial went as well as we possibly could. Usually when you start a criminal trial, from the word go, you are faced with the real obstacles, the evidence that you're going to have to contradict or demolish. But in the Chamberlain case, it was quite different. In that case, all of the people that were at the campsite were very supportive. We referred to them as the eyewitnesses. They all believed that Lindy was innocent, that a dingo had taken that baby, and it was only later when the scientific evidence came on board that the police changed their mind. One of the important elements in the evidence too was evidence of tracking. During the second inquest, it became apparent that tracks had been found where the dingo had gone. They appeared to be the tracks of a dingo, and every now and again you would see a depression in with these tracks where a weighted object had been put down, leaving an impression just like you would expect from the jumpsuit that the baby was wearing. We had heard that the Aboriginal trackers that came in had seen those tracks, they'd followed those back to the tent, and they were convinced that these were the tracks of a dingo that had left the tent, gone into the sandhill carrying the baby. What happened, of course, at the trial was that we wanted the Aboriginal trackers called, but the Crown said to us, no, it's a completely red herring. This is a murder trial. We've got such damning scientific evidence. We are not going to call them. So if you want to call them, you'll need to call them as your witnesses. Now, one of the things that is a real problem in our courts, and I guess it is a common problem around the world, is that First Nation people do not fare well in our courts. And what we didn't want to do was be in a position where we called them as our witnesses, and they were then going to be subjected to a cross-examination. But the gentleman right on the end was the Chief Ranger, Roth. He was just as supportive and an excellent tracker too. And so what we decided to do, rather than risk the evidence being watered down in cross-examination, we would rely on the evidence of Roth, who gave very much the evidence that the trackers would have given. But after 2 weeks, all of that favourable evidence went away, and of course we were then faced with the scientific evidence, and the first man was of course Professor Cameron. He was the man that got this underway because the jumpsuit had been taken to him in London. He had examined it and he said, yes, I can tell you there is absolutely no evidence of a dingo or a dog attack on this clothing. In fact, the blood staining on this clothing is so uniform, the head has either been decapitated or the throat has been cut. And then he also went on to say, I can actually detect handprints, bloodied handprints on that jumpsuit. And you can see there where I've marked in the vertical and the horizontal, those lines, he said, was, in his opinion, the bloodied handprints of a small adult. We also discovered, of course, that, as is so often the case, he hadn't been given a full brief. One of the things he hadn't been told about was that the only item of clothing that had not been found with the jumpsuit and the other material was an overgarment, what Lindy called a matinee jacket. And we have said to him, well, the whole blood staining is going to be affected by this overgarment, which, of course, he was quite surprised. But as typical of these Crown witnesses, rather than making any concessions, he said, it doesn't affect my opinion at all. After him, this man got into the box. Professor Chaikin, he was the textile expert, and again he said, I've examined that clothing. I've examined the damage. That material is cotton and nylon. And let me tell you, I do not believe that cut in the collar and in the sleeve could possibly have been caused by a dingo. The only way that could have been caused is by human agency. He preferred a pair of scissors, and as chance would have it, when the Chamberlain car was seized, they found a pair of little nail scissors in the car, which they then used to replicate the cutting. Chaikin's evidence was emphasised on the basis that he said, why I'm so sure that it's actually been cut with a pair of scissors is when I went along the cut edges of the material, I was able to extract these little loops. They're little loops of cotton. He said there is no way in the world a dog or a dingo could possibly have cut that material and produced these little cotton loops, which I was able to pull off the cut area. But the star of the show, of course, was the very lady that we had seen in Alice Springs at the second inquest, Joy Cool. One of the best witnesses I have ever seen, and just so dogmatic. But boy, were we ready for Joy. But she knew we were going to be ready for her. And what she had done in those few months is she'd prepared to answer what she anticipated were going to be the questions that we were going to ask her. She had done so many tests, and this time she had actually kept photographs of the tests, which she then produced to us and said, when I give my evidence, I'm going to be showing these tests. And I can tell you, out of the hundreds of tests that I've conducted, I have been able to show that reagent that I got from Germany and used in these tests is specific. If I get a reaction between the two slides, I can guarantee that it is fetal hemoglobin and from a baby under the age of 6 months. Well, what Barry Botcher, our witness, had found was that the reagent was not specific. And when Mrs. Cool had actually carried out her tests, Patricia Fleming was the only one who picked up that she said that a baby of that age would only have fetal hemoglobin. In reality, once a baby is born, the blood starts changing. They go from the fetal to adult, and so you get a mixture. And so what Barry found when he tested it is that he not only got a reaction with the fetal hemoglobin, but he also got a reaction with adult hemoglobin. He found that this reagent was not as trusty or specific as Mrs. Cool had said. And when we had a look at Mrs. Cool's photographs that she was going to produce to us, we were amazed because there, ringed, were not just one little smudge. There were actually two smudges, which was exactly what Barry Botcher had found. And when we saw these photographs, we thought, wow, this is almost game, set, match. Mrs. Cool has, by these photographs, shown us that what she's getting are two reactions. You can see one of those rings there, the two rings that have been in red are clearly got two reactions with them. We thought, wow, when we have Mrs. Cool in the box and we confronted with those, she is going to break down and admit that she's made a mistake. But I can tell you there was absolutely nothing like that at all. When she was showing theirs, she just refused to accept that what she was actually seeing were two reactions. She said, no, they're just artifacts. I don't accept that there are two reactions at all. But what we were really looking forward to was giving her a testing time under what was really the Crown smoking gun. Because when Mrs. Cool had tested the car, they had found under the dash in front of where the passenger sat, there was a spray, a blood spray. And that had been analysed by Mrs. Cool, and she had tested it. And one of the things that we particularly wanted to look at were the work notes of what her tests had shown. And what Trish had shown me was that when we went through those work notes and she tested 3 spots from the underdash spray, she had not used proper controls. When you actually test these things, you've got to test them against a multitude of controls. And one of the things you've got to do is make sure it's not animal blood, so you test it against an anti-pig or an anti-sheep. And what these work notes had shown was that she had not used controls. When she gave evidence, we made sure we tied her down to saying the work notes that you're going to give to us are a complete and accurate record of your work notes. Yes. So she'd given sworn evidence about that. So we thought, how on earth is she going to get out of this? And she knew exactly what was coming because she had obviously reviewed her work. And so when we then turned from the what she said were smudges to claiming that the testing she had done on the smoking gun was defective work, she then said, I don't know whether Mr. Tipple got a copy of this. Now, what she meant by that is that I had stood with her right at the photocopier. I'd made sure that I'd got very clean and good copies of all of the work notes. So I knew that she wasn't going to be able to fudge those. I knew what I had was an accurate representation. But then when she said this, the alarm bells went. And she then turned this page over, and on the back was this notation, no reactions. You'll see an asterisk there with animal, anti-sera, pig, and sheep. So I knew straight away that what she had done was realise that her testing had been defective, but she had put this entry on the back of a page with an asterisk. Of course, couldn't put an asterisk on the front page, but of course, the dilemma you have in a situation like that when you are totally surprised by a witness is, what do? Do you actually say you are lying? It would have played right in the hands of the Crown, who then would have said, oh, the defence are so desperate that they're suggesting this Crown witness has come along, manufactured this evidence, and is lying in court. That's how desperate they are. And so we did not want to take that risk. But other than that, the trial had gone well. And it was clear at the end of the trial that the judge realised that there was no doubt about a reasonable doubt. What the judge does at the end, he sums up the case for the prosecution and he sums up the case for the defence. And all the way while he's doing all of this, we're thinking, why hasn't he mentioned Mrs. Lowe, our ace card, because if you believe Mrs. Lowe, the Crown case must fail. Well, he didn't mention her until right at the end. And right at the end, before the jury went out, he said, you must pay attention to the evidence of Mrs. Lowe. If you accept the evidence of Mrs. Lowe, then you must acquit. Well, on the basis of that, we were pretty confident. And as we went out of the court and the jury filed out to make its deliberations, we expected that what should happen is that they would come back and the Chamberlains would be acquitted. Well, one of the things that had happened during the trial is right at the start you saw that there were 4 people in our legal team. The last person to join us was a person who actually lived in Darwin. He was from Legal Aid, Greg Kavanagh. And he joined the team, and of course, he knew nothing really much about the case until he joined us, but he was wonderful. He got on board, and the thing that he particularly was good at was being a local. Every day and every night, he would drive us to the steps of the court, and at the end of the day, I can tell you, you would not even see that car. There was such a throng of media. It was my job to walk through that and get into the car with the Chamberlains and go to where we were staying. Greg was so sure that we were going to win that case. He said to me, Stuart, he said, we've got to do something. We've got to do something special. After the jury gives its verdict of acquittal, what do you think we should do? And I thought about it, and the Chariots of Fire movie had just come out. And I love that theme, the Chariots of Fire. And I said, Greg, I said, go and get yourself a copy of Chariots of Fire. I said, after we get that verdict of acquittal, I said, we'll come out on the steps of the court. I said, we will walk down through the throng. We'll get into your little Mazda car. I said, I'll wind the windows down. We'll hit the play button. The Chariots of Fire will blare out, and we'll drive off there in triumph. So he was ecstatic about that. And so that was the plan. But sadly, ladies and gentlemen, after 6 hours, only 6 hours, the jury came back. And as I told you in that first presentation, as soon as they came in, I could tell from their body language and the way they couldn't look at us that there was not going to be good news. And that's what happened. Lindy was found guilty of murder. Michael was found guilty of being an accessory after the fact. So instead of the triumphal departure, the judge said, Mr. Chamberlain, I don't have any discretion in this. I have no discretion but to sentence you to life imprisonment with hard labour. Take it out. So immediately, instead of the triumphal departure, Lindy was taken into custody and taken down into the cells below, and a little later on was put into a prison van and taken out to the jail where she began serving her life sentence. Well, I can tell you, it was a pretty sad day. And when I returned to my office, it was a bit like this, and that made me even more depressing. But there was a lot of work to do because Lindy was about to give birth, and we needed to know exactly what should happen, what the precedents were, and what the protocols. What I discovered was that the normal procedure and protocol was that when ladies are convicted in Lindy's situation, they're allowed to have the baby and take the baby back to jail, so there is a bonding, and that baby can then be brought up in that prison environment. And so I immediately made an application to the Northern Territory saying, well, when Lindy gives birth, this is what we would like. Immediately the answer came back, no way. Your client is a convicted killer. We're not going to let her anywhere near that baby. In fact, when her baby is born, we're not even going to allow her to hold that baby. The baby will be taken away from her immediately. And so a few weeks after Lindy was convicted, she went into labour, and she was taken to the hospital. And in her autobiography, she says just how difficult that situation was. Try to imagine her not only in jail, but here being convicted of the most heinous death and killing of a baby that she really loved. And she was told that as soon as her baby was born, it was going to be taken off her, and she wasn't even going to be able to hold that baby. And she describes in her autobiography just how difficult that birth was. She fought every contraction because she really believed that as soon as that baby was born, she wasn't even going to be able to hold her. But like so many things in this story, there are just always wonderful glimpses of humanity. And the people in that theatre were given those instructions, but fortunately there was enough humanity in them not to obey them. And so in fact, when little Carlia was born, they allowed Lindy not only to hold her, but they gave 2 hours of time that you can see the obviously delight on Lindy's face here as she bonded with that beautiful little baby. So they just didn't tell the authorities the baby had been born. And so, as you can see, it just made such a wonderful time and was just such a beautiful experience for Lindy, given the circumstances she was in. So of all the applications that I made, the only one that I never thought would ever have any chance of success was a bail application. Never ever succeeded on a bail application for somebody once they have been convicted of murder. But you've got to try everything. And so we made a bail application. We said we are going to appeal, and while the appeals are heard, we want Lindy released on bail. And so the Northern Territory government said, well, we want some testing done by your psychologist or psychiatrist. We will have our psychologist test her. And so those tests were performed. We then had a bail application. We had to go before 3 judges. We succeeded. We succeeded because the Northern Territory psychologist was even more glowing and affirmative than my witness. He said, I've performed all of the testing on this lady, and I can tell you it is my opinion she could not have harmed that child, and she could not possibly harm this little baby that's been born. And so on a majority decision of 2-1, Lindy was released on bail. So what happened then were, of course, the appeals. And what you've got to understand is the appeal system, like here, is very difficult. Up until the trial, you have the presumption of innocence. Once you're convicted, that onus swaps. You've got to show the court there has been a mistake. And really, the only viable way that you've got any success is to show that the trial judge has made an error of law when he was directing the jury. So our problem was we had the most favourable summing up you could imagine. We pored over that judgment and there was absolutely no defect or problem that we could find. So the only appeal ground we had was really on the basis that the verdict of that jury was unsafe and unsatisfactory. So the first appeal was before 3 judges, and after hearing the evidence, they said, we don't believe that we've got jurisdiction to make a decision on that ground, and we lost 3-love. The last point of appeal was the High Court in Australia, and we went before 5 judges. And during that hearing, it was obvious we had 2 judges that were very in favour of us. We had 2 judges that were not in favour of us, and the person who was vacillating was the Chief Justice. And after we left the court on that hearing, I remember us talking, and the leader of our legal team said, there is no way in the world the Chief Justice is going to down us 3-2 on a ground that verdict is unsafe and unsatisfactory. How can you have 2 judges of the highest court in the land say that verdict is unreasonable? Isn't that a reasonable doubt? But sadly, that's what happened. When we went back to court, we lost the appeal 3-2. But a lot was happening in the meantime. My phone kept ringing, and I took a call from this man. As I said to you, the Tasmanian connection is very strong, very important in this case. I didn't know this fellow, Here's Les Smith. He rang me and said, I want to help. As I spoke to him, I grew more and more inclined to work with this man. He told me he was a Tasmanian, which was a good start. But when he told me what he wanted to do and why he wanted to do it, it gave me absolute confidence that this was a man I could work for. Because he said, my primary reason for coming to you and offering my services is I want to find the truth. I said, Les, we're on common ground. He said, Stuart, if I come and do this work, he said, if I find evidence that's going to be contrary to your client, is that going to be a problem? And I said, I have such confidence in my client, that is not going to be a problem. He said, what do you want me to do? He had a scientific background, but unlike all of the Crown witnesses who had curriculum vitae that when you read them out in court, they took half a day, this man was the most underqualified expert I have ever worked with. All he had was a diploma, but wow, what a scientist. So he said, Stuart, he said, what would you like me to work on? I said, Les, I've got no doubt what you've got to start working on is that underdash spray. I've been totally dudded on that, and I said that is the most critical evidence that the Crown had, because they were able to say to the jury that Lindy had sat in the car, in the passenger seat. She had cut that baby's throat, and when she was putting the baby into a bag to conceal its body, the last dying act of that baby was an arterial spray that got up underneath the dash. I said, we have not been able to explain what that is. So I showed him the photographs. So this was a photograph of that arterial spray. Now, the Crown witnesses, they had the forensic pathologist from England who was billed as the greatest pathologist in the world. He'd looked at it and said, yes, arterial spray. We had the pathologist from the Northern Territory who said he'd looked at it under a low-powered microscope, and yes, it was arterial spray. We had Mrs. Cool, who had said she had dug into parts of that spray pattern and she had tested it, and she was able to say without a shadow of a doubt that that was fetal blood, the blood of a baby under the age of 6 months. So I didn't hear from Les for a couple of weeks, and he rang me and he said, Stuart, he said, where is the original spray pattern? I said, well, it was just before the appeal had been heard. And I said, all of the exhibits are now in the High Court in the protection and custody of the High Court Registrar. He said, am I able to go and have a look at it? I said, absolutely, Les. So I made arrangements. I rang the registrar. I said, I have a witness who wants access to that spray pattern. And so that's what happened. We flew from Sydney down to Canberra. The registrar got out the exhibit. We had a look at this metal plate with this pattern on it. And then Les explained to me, he said, well, this is what I did, Stuart. He said, I had a look at that, and I said to myself, does that look like blood? He said, it didn't look like blood to me. So he said, I set up a little experiment of myself where I produced an arterial spray on a similar material. And he said, that's what blood looks like. And then he reached in and he took out a 10-power magnifying glass eyepiece. And he put the spray pattern from the car up to his eye, and he nodded his head. He then passed it to me, and he said, look at this. And there, under this only 10-pound magnification, I looked at that part of the stain, and I could see that whatever that was, it had been there before the car was painted. You remember what colour the car was? Canary yellow. Can you see what's over that spray pattern? It's yellow paint. And so what Les was able to show me was that after he'd done his experimentation, he also noticed that there was a direction of that spray. And he just used simple trigonometry to work out where that spray pattern was coming from. He then went around the wreckers' yards and got cars of similar to the Tirana. And what he actually found was that this spray was a spray pattern that was put on when the car was being manufactured. In the front wheel of the car is a little drain plug called the plenum drain hole. And when the car was being manufactured, they would spray this soundproofing material under the wheel arch. And every now and again, depending on the angle of the sprayer, you would get parts of the spray that would come, and this is what was happening. Rather than an arterial spray, this was actually sound-deadening material. And then, of course, the final act was the car was being painted and the same thing was happening. That under the wheel arch there would be paint, and then, as you can see, the paint was on the top of this material. So I knew then that what we had was a killer blow to the Crown case. But the sad thing is, even though we knew that before the appeal, in Australia you cannot introduce any new evidence, no matter how important in a trial appeal process. And so we weren't able to use that evidence. And I can tell you it nearly killed me during the appeal, knowing that I had what I knew was a killer blow. But then Les said to me, Stuart, he said, is there anything else you'd like me to work on? And I said, well, Les, it's funny you should say that. I said, one of the other things that I think really influenced the jury was the damage to the jumpsuit. Because what we found, and I still find this today, people say, surely, if a dingo was involved in this case, why isn't there a body? Why wasn't any body part found? And you can't tell me that the sort of damage that you got to that jumpsuit was caused by a dog or a dingo. And so I showed him the photographs. And I didn't hear from Les for several months. And then he rang and said, Stuart, I'm really excited to tell you I've got some important evidence to show you. He said after our last meeting, he said every night, he said, I would pack up my dog's evening meal in the jumpsuit material. He had a Kelpie cross, not a dingo, an old aged dog. And he said all of her meal at night was securely wrapped in the same material that made up Azaria's jumpsuit. He said in no time at all, he said, Susie learnt how to cut that. And he said, you will not believe the cuts that she was able to get. And I said, Les, it's not enough just to get in there. I said, you remember Professor Chaikin said he was convinced it was cut with a pair of scissors because of the cotton loops that he found when he went along the damaged area. So Les said, loops, how many do you want? He said, she's producing better loops than he found in that jumpsuit. And he showed me this one, and then he compared the one that Chaikin had to the one that he had. Cleaner, more precise cutting at all. So he then said, and that's not all. I said, what do you mean that's not all? He said, let me tell you, he said, I am absolutely positive that the damage on that jumpsuit can be shown to have been caused by a dingo, and I'll tell you why. He said, remember, he said, in the jumpsuit collar. He said, right in that collar, he said, there was a thread. I'll see if this, he said, there was a thread joined from end to end. He said, and what I found when Susie was actually cutting this material is that every now and again the material would be cut and blocked into her incisors, and so you wouldn't get a precise cut. And he said you would get the nylon threads every now and again that were not severed. And he said, look at that damage in the jumpsuit. He said that there is a classic right at the end of that area of the jumpsuit. He said that is a classic example of what I found showing that what that damage had been caused by was a dingo. There is no way in the world, he said, you could possibly do that without, with a pair of scissors without knowing what you had to produce. So he then said, and by the way, he said another development. He said during the trial there were hairs found on the jumpsuit and in the baby's tent that the Crown said were cat hairs. The Chamberlains owned a cat. The evidence was, yes, there were hairs, but there were no hairs found from a dingo or dog. He said there's been some new studies on it. There's a fellow called Hans Brunner. Can we get access to those hairs and have him review it? And so again, I made a call to the registrar of the High Court. We went down there. I was introduced to Hans Brunner, who flew in 2 seconds. He looked at the hairs that had been kept on a mounted slide, and he said, no doubt at all, dingo or dog hairs. And so suddenly the smoking gun had gone, the damage to the jumpsuit had gone. Suddenly we had even more direct evidence that there was a dingo. But all the time, this man, Barry Botcher, who I just have so much respect for, was beavering away. He was absolutely convinced that we needed to get the German factory that produced that reagent that Mrs. Cool said was specific on side. He said, look, I've set up a meeting. I want you to fly with me to Germany and we will conduct tests in the factory, and I will make my point that what Mrs. Cool said would only give a reaction to to fetal hemoglobin was non-specific. And so we went to Germany, and sure enough, we were able to convince the German factory that they should support Barry's version of the testing, and that the tests, again done by Mrs. Cool, were not reliable. But then just before I was able to do any more, he rang me from Mount Isa, because you may recall the Chamberlains were living in Mount Isa in northern Queensland. It was a mining town, a copper mine. And Barry had had a conference up there, and he just decided that when he went there, he would do a little bit of testing, because the presumptive test to see whether something is blood was the orthotoluidine. In the first lecture, I show you how it's a two-stage test. You wipe all the surfaces with the blotting paper, and then you apply orthotoluidine, and then the second stage, you put on the hydrogen peroxide, and if it possibly is blood, you'll get this peacock blue reaction. And Mrs. Cool said that when she tested the Chamberlain car, she was getting these presumptive reactions all over the place. And what she was saying was that it was clear to her the car had been awash with blood and had been carefully cleaned. And again, it was very damaging evidence for the Chamberlains. Well, Barry up there just decided that he would perform the presumptive test, because what he had noticed when he was in Mount Isa in his hire car is that being a mining town, you get a lot of dust in the car. And so he applied the very test that Mrs. Cool had done to the dust in that car, and what he discovered was that the presumptive test gave a very good positive, that you couldn't tell the difference between copper dust and blood. And so what did we do? Well, once your appeal process is exhausted, that is the end of the road. You don't have any legal rights after that. The only way forward is to make an application, and you have to make an application to the Attorney General of the jurisdiction. You have to convince that Attorney General that there's been a miscarriage of justice, and if he is so disposed, he will order that there be a commission of inquiry. And in that commission of inquiry, then what they actually do is, rather than our adversarial system, they actually go on a pursuit of truth. It's an inquisitorial format. So you have testing done by court officers, the defence have their representatives, the Crown have their representatives, and so it's a three-way fight, but what you're there to do is to find the truth. And so I was fairly confident when I made that application to the Northern Territory. Why is that not working? We've got a, oh, yeah. So when we made that application, I was fairly confident. I mean, I couldn't imagine having a stronger application. We had proof the arterial spray wasn't blood. The German factory had confirmed Barry Botch's results. The dingo hairs were identified, the tent and clothes. Copper dust gives a positive OTOL. And of course, we had that other incredible evidence of the jumpsuit being damaged by a dingo. So here we are, nearly 3 years after Lindy has gone back to jail, because after the first appeal, she was taken back into custody and went back up to Darwin to continue serving her life sentence with hard labour. So we made the application and we made it in June, and we knew that we really had to put a lot of pressure on the Northern Territory. I made special trips down to the Parliament in Canberra because the Northern Territory is a territory, but they'd only just got self-government, and the federal government still had jurisdictional superiority over them. And if the Northern Territory weren't going to play ball, I was going to put pressure on them by getting the federal politicians on side. So every day, every week that I went down, I'd produce a slideshow like this showing how bad the evidence was. The next day, the Northern Territory Attorney General would fly in and say, don't listen to Tipple, you've got to leave this to us, we will resolve it, and we are going to give careful consideration to the application for the inquiry that he's made. So my application was made in June, and we had to wait and wait and wait. And then eventually in November, I received this letter from the Northern Territory, basically saying, we have examined all of the evidence, and what you've got is not cogent, which in layman's terms says it's not worth a hill of beans. Go away. End of the road. That was the end of anything Tipple could do. We needed a miracle. And ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have a break, but let me tell you, the age of miracles is not dead.
Thank you so much, Stuart. Even though I've heard you tell this before, I'm still on the edge of my seat listening. I want to thank again Helen, and I think Ray Lynn, is that correct? Her student was with her on the last time. Helen, thank you for coming back to the piano. As you know, camp meeting programming cost us here at the church, and we'd love to share that cost with our community and congregation. So as Helen plays, before Stuart returns in a few moments, our deacons will receive an offering, and I want you to know how appreciative and how grateful we are for it. So God bless you as you give and as we hear the end of the story in a moment.
So we needed a miracle. Where was that miracle going to come from? Well, in February, a few months after I received that letter from the Northern Territory, a tourist, David Brett, arrived at the Rock. He had become obsessed with the case. And he began that climb. And let me tell you, I've done that climb. It's one of the scariest climbs you will ever do. And where the people depicted in that photograph are is about Chicken Rock. They call it Chicken Rock because a lot of people chicken out when they get to that point. And then, instead of following what is a well-worn track, he deviated. And he wasn't seen again, not alive. We can only assume that what had happened was that he had wandered off that track and had fallen down the rock, and his body was discovered some days later. There were parts of his body that were missing. And so the police formed a line search. They wanted to actually find the rest of this poor unfortunate fellow. And so they spread out and searched this area, which is known at the Rock just by the lichen. And as this line search went through the bush looking for whatever it could, there was only one person in that line search that had been at the Rock when Azari disappeared. There was only one person in that line search that knew that all of the clothing had not been found, that there was a matinee jacket that was missing. It was a matinee jacket that we as the defence had said, well, that's the reason for the blood staining on the jumpsuit. It's the reason why you didn't get all of the evidence of a dingo, because if the dingo took the baby as we said it did, that's the item of clothing that would have been first carried away by the dingo. But as this line search made its way through this area, John Beasy, that one person, the mechanic at Ayers Rock, saw a tiny little bit of material sticking out of the sand. And as he bent down, he started to tug, and as he tugged, he pulled out the matinee jacket. The Northern Territory didn't know what to do. They sat on this news, and I got a tip-off from the media. I got a call saying, the Northern Territory have found the matinee jacket and they do not know what to do. You better ring the Attorney General and find out what's happening, because of course the pressure had been mounting on them. They'd refused the application and the timing just couldn't have been worse for them. And so I rang the Attorney General and he confirmed that the matinee jacket had been found. He invited me to go to Darwin so that we could then decide on a protocol. Of course, the matinee jacket had to be identified by Lindy. And so I flew up from Sydney to Darwin, and suddenly my status had changed. From being persona non grata, I was suddenly met by the chauffeur of the Commissioner of Police. I was chauffeured to the headquarters to speak to the Attorney General and the Commissioner of Police, and we agreed that Lindy needed to be brought from the jail, shown this matinee jacket, and positively identify it as the matinee jacket that Azaria had been wearing and had been lost for these 6 years. And that's what happened. Lindy was brought into the jail and it didn't take her very long at all. She'd given a very concise description of that jumpsuit. It still had its label on, it was a marquee, and there she is, brought in from the jail at that poignant moment, identifying the matinee jacket. From that point of time, the Northern Territory were in fast retreat. They realised that they were in trouble. And so it was agreed that Mrs. Cool was not going to be anywhere near this matinee jacket, that we were going to fly in some independent policemen and forensic witnesses from another state in Victoria, and they were going to conduct the test. Now, I don't know whether this will show, but I just wanted to give you some idea of the distances we had to carry. I, of course, live just north of Sydney. To get to Darwin, I have to fly all the way up to there, and then from Darwin, came down to the middle of Australia near Alice Springs where the rock is, and I just wanted you to get some comprehension of the distances and the complexity, because it was agreed that what would happen is that I would then fly from Darwin down to the rock. I would meet with the forensic expert. They flew in from Victoria, and we would agree on a protocol of how the further testing was going to be performed. One of the things they wanted to know was, is there going to be any bones or other body parts? And so we met that night when I got there, and it was rather interesting. The expert that they had called in had had no experience working in the sort of heat and the conditions here at the rock. So we asked him what he wanted to do, and he gave us an outline what he was going to do. He'd go there, he'd peg it out, and he would sift the sand from the furthest extremities to where the clothing was found, on the basis that you don't start where you think you're going to find something, because if you don't find anything, you lose interest. You actually start from the extremities and work your way in. So he was telling us that he was going to be able to spend, 5 or 6 hours in the heat of the desert to carry out this test. And I knew, and all the locals knew, that wasn't going to work, because I can tell you now it was February and the heat around that rock is unbelievable. And I'll never forget that morning when he started his searching. We went out to this site where he set up his little canopy here, and he walked out and he started taking ground temperatures, and I could see him shaking his head. And then he turned and he walked back to where we were standing under the shade. And as he walked, I could hear this flap, flap, flap. And he was wearing those old track shoes that had laminations in them. And the heat had been so intense, these soles delaminated. It was a bit like Charlie Chaplin by the time he got to where we were. But I knew from seeing his work that I had every confidence that he was going to do the right thing. I was just so intent by that time just to get home, I can tell you. And so I left there, and I flew from the Rock back to Alice Springs, and I was waiting at the Alice Springs airport for my flight from Alice Springs back to Sydney. And while I was waiting for my connection, I heard this announcement: Mr. Tipple, can you come to the office? And so I went to the office, and they handed the phone to me, and I heard the Attorney General introduce himself again. Mr. Tipple, Marshal Perron, Attorney General, Northern Territory. I just want to tell you that we have decided that we are going to hold a royal commission into the circumstances. And not only that, but we have also decided to release Lindy Chamberlain immediately, and whatever the result of the inquiry, she will not have to go back to jail. And so as we were talking on that phone, Lindy was actually being escorted from the jail, and we had planned for that day. Lindy had planned for that day. But I can tell you, I was exhausted. But I'd made a promise to Lindy. She had extracted a promise from me that when this day happened and she was released from jail, that I would fly to Darwin and I would escort her home. And I can tell you, as excited I was about being able to do that, I just wanted to get home. And so by the time I got to Sydney, I knew where Lindy was. We had it all planned. She had made a dress, which I will show you, her coming home dress. I knew where she was, and I put a phone call through to her, and she answered the phone. And I said, Lindy, I want to ask a favour. I want you to release me from my promise. You know what she said? She said, Stuart, a promise is a promise. And so instead of getting home, it was back to Darwin. But Lindy knew best, because I can tell you it was just one of the most glorious experiences to actually go there and to be able to bring her home to a little girl who was then 3 and to her husband who were waiting. And when she came home to her home at Cooranbong, they had ringed all of the trees with yellow ribbons. It was just the most glorious way to be returned. And to know whatever the result, she wasn't going back. But then, of course, I had the Royal Commission. And I was pretty excited about that, because I thought we were finally on the pursuit of truth. This was no longer just a little guy up against a big guy. And of course, it was just wonderful to roll these experts in and just to expose them for what they were. Cameron just would not, again, make concessions, but other experts said that the matinee jacket would have affected the pooling. No one agreed that what he said were bloodied handprints were in fact handprints at all. The Commission had the resources, and they actually tested what he said were bloodied handprints, and they found that the marks weren't even blood, it was sand. And so Cameron was pretty well discredited. Of course, he was another one who said that was the arterial spray under the dash. So he didn't put up much of a fight at all. Professor Chaikin, on the other hand, was different. When Les discovered, of course, that he could produce these, or his dog could produce these tufts, he said to me, I'm going to write to Chaikin. I mean, he's a fellow scientist. I'll give him all of this evidence, and I'll show him just how wrong he was and how his evidence has actually contributed to what's been a terrible miscarriage of justice. And I said, Les, good luck, but you're on your own. And so he wrote a letter, scientist, to Chaikin, giving the photographs, giving the details of his testing, and inviting Chaikin to meet with him so that they could further discuss, explore, and make a wrong right. 2 weeks after Chaikin received the letter from Smith, he wrote back to Smith and said, I do not want to engage in any further dialogue or correspondence. And so by the time he came to the Commission, he had actually come up with a new theory. He wasn't prepared to accept that he was wrong. He came up with a theory then that he still believed it was cutting with scissors, because he had looked under a high-powered microscope and he thought that the cutting on there was different to what a dingo or dog. Anyway, the judge wasn't very impressed that with Cameron or with Chaikin. And of course, the person that we couldn't wait to get into the witness box was Joy Cool. Eventually, she had to concede that she had made a mistake. One of the other things that actually became apparent during the Royal Commission was that they discovered that in her laboratory there was another set of records, the laboratory control books. And guess what? When they were compared to her work notes, it was discovered that she had not used the proper controls. But in her evidence, she also conceded that she had had reactions with adult blood, but had not disclosed that in her evidence. But the star of the show undoubtedly were the Aboriginal trackers. The Aboriginal trackers were amazing because we insisted that this time the Aboriginal trackers be called to give the evidence that we knew they were going to give. And so the summonses went out and they came back and they said, "We're not going anywhere near your white man's court." We knew it was a dingo all the time, and if we say it's a dingo, we're going to end up like Mrs. Chamberlain. No, sorry, not going to have a bar of it. And so there was frantic negotiations, and in the end, the commissioner got them to agree to come on the basis that when they gave their evidence, they would be able to have it interpreted in their own language. And so when they came into court, they had their interpreter or translator there, and everything we said was put into their language. They would reply in their language, and then it was translated. But of course, they gave their evidence as we expected, that they saw the tracks, that they were convinced that those tracks were the tracks of a dingo carrying that baby. And of course, the Crown just would not give up. They were determined to destroy the evidence of these trackers, and it became quite embarrassing. But one day, which I will never forget, one of the trackers, who's not in this photograph, walked into the court. And wow, what an entrance he made. And I'll still remember how he strode into the court and he sat in the witness box and he folded his arms like this, and he was just so regal. And then the questions came. And then after a while, the Crown Counsel kept saying to him, "You say that those tracks that you saw were a dingo carrying a baby. You can't be sure, can you, that they are not tracks of a dingo carrying a baby kangaroo?" And he would say no. And the question would come in again. "You can't be sure that those tracks weren't the tracks of a dingo carrying a kangaroo?" No. In the end, the interpreter said, "Excuse me, look, please, if you keep asking the same question to this man, it is offensive, because he is accepting that what you're saying to him is he's telling a lie. So please, don't do it." So he sat down again. And what does the Crown do? "I put it to you, you can't be sure that those tracks you saw were not a dingo carrying a little baby kangaroo." Well, the arms got unfolded, and he walked out of the witness box, and he stood in front of the bar table, and he started a performance that I can't do justice, and we haven't got time to tell you how long it went, but it went a really long time, and it was something like this. And on it went. And then And then he finished, and he got back into the witness box, and he folded his arms, and we all leaned forward, waiting for the interpreter, who leaned into the mic and said, "No." The Crown was so incensed, they said, "We demand a copy of that transcript, and we're going to have our own interpreter tell us what he is actually saying to us." And so that's what happened. And the next morning, I'll never forget, the commissioner came onto the bench and, "Mr. Crown, how'd you go last night? Did you have your interpreter have a look at the transcript?" And it was actually a recording. Yes, Your Honour. And what did he say? He said, "No, Your Honour." Yeah, they were terrific. But one of the things that I need to tell you is how important, justice is, because the people that supported the Chamberlains, these were the witnesses, and they actually have kept meeting quite regularly. And this was several years after they gave evidence. And after they'd given their evidence, a number of them, most of the people here, actually went on a road trip around Australia. I couldn't get involved in it because I didn't want to be having it suggested that I'd influenced these people, but they were so outraged with the verdict and knew that it was just so bad and so wrong that they held public rallies, and they said their evidence and got support and started a petition, which I think is still the biggest petition ever in Australian history for people calling for that Royal Commission. But these people, a number of them, suffered serious depression. And why is that? Because, of course, they blame themselves. They thought that if the jury accepted the Crown and didn't accept their evidence, that they had let Lindy down. And it just made me appreciate that, the cause of justice and the effects of an injustice is like throwing that pebble into the mill pond. The ripples just keep going. It just doesn't affect the immediate players. You've got people like them that suffered serious consequences. So, of course, with the evidence as it unfolded, it was clear that the Crown case was in a complete shambles. And the Commissioner, in fact, invited the Crown to propose a new theory. They'd gone into the court with the theory, of course, where the murder had taken place. It became obvious that wasn't a viable theory, and the Commissioner invited them. Well, that theory's gone. Do you have another theory? And, of course, they couldn't come up with one. And so what happened was the Commissioner made a report to the government, and in that report he said that the Chamberlains should be exonerated, and that had the evidence been available at the trial, there would have been a verdict of not guilty. And so immediately the government responded. They pardoned the Chamberlains, and when I got the pardon, everyone thought that we were going to be quite happy with that. And I said, no, I'm not happy with a pardon, because a pardon is not put you back to where you were or in the same place as if you get a verdict of acquittal. A pardon is a prerogative writ that just allows you to escape the punishment of a conviction, but it doesn't declare you as being innocent. And I said, you deserve to be declared. And the Northern Territory said, but our legislation doesn't allow it. And I said, well, you've got to change the legislation. And that's what happened. And they changed their legislation. We went back to their Court of Appeal. And the Chamberlains were exonerated. They were acquitted. and they were compensated. So a number of things happened, some good things, and some interesting things. And I know a number of you have actually seen the movie which in Australia was called Evil Angels. Here it was A Cry in the Dark. And Meryl Streep played Lindy, and Sam Neill played Michael. And we had an interesting time. The director asked Cherie and I to go down there and meet with Meryl and Sam. And we were blown away, because you just realise that what you see is not what you expect. And you'll remember this scene, which is a depiction of the campsite in real life. Well, when we walked onto the film set, we realised that what they'd actually done was that they'd recreated that whole scene undercover in this big warehouse that you can see here. But Fred Shepsky, who was the director, particularly wanted me to meet Meryl, and I was very happy to meet Meryl. And so we flew into Melbourne after we'd seen around on the set, and they said, come into they were filming a segment in the house. So we walked into the set, and it was filming. So we stood to one side, and out came Meryl, dressed as Lindy. I'd never met her at that point in time, but she was so in character, and she knew exactly who I was. And as soon as she saw me standing there, she came over to me and she threw her arms around me and said, thank you for all you've done for me. And then she disappeared. And then a PA came out and gave me this photograph. Many thanks for your kind help. And we didn't see Meryl again. We saw Sam, and we had a meal with the other actors. And it was interesting having lunch with a lot of those actors. We said, wow, it must just be so great working with Meryl. And the actors that we were dining with were the policemen depicted in the movie. And they said, well, quite frankly, it's hell working with her. She is so in character. Every time she walks past us, we get the evil eye. But one of the things that really the Chamberlains were troubled about was that after the second inquest, the finding was made by the coroner that the baby had been murdered. And whatever the finding in a coronial court, that is what goes on the death certificate. So when we applied for a death certificate, even though they'd been exonerated, the death certificate still said murdered. And so we knew that we had to have a third inquest. And so we applied, and we were granted a third inquest. And sadly, it was a really poor show. The coroner really towed the political line. He did not want a maker finding that the dingo had taken the baby. And so, although he again completely exonerated the Chamberlains, he said, I'm not going to make a finding that the baby was taken by a dingo. I'm just going to enter open finding. And that really annoyed the Chamberlains and worried them, because I'm sure I'm talking to people here that have lost a child. And anyone that's lost a child that can do anything to stop that happening to somebody else will know how the Chamberlains felt. And they said, look, the danger of dingoes is still not being appreciated. And until we get that finding, we are not going to be happy. So 30 years after the baby disappeared, Lindy posted on her website, unfinished business. And she got contacted by a lady who was then the Chief Minister of the Northern Territory and said, what can I do? And she said, well, speak to Stuart. So I spoke to her and I said, look, we're very unhappy with that third inquest. We think that there has now been well and truly enough evidence to show that the baby was taken by a dingo. We'd kept, and Michael Chamberlain in particular, had kept meticulous records of dingo attacks. And what we'd discovered was that the dingoes that were in tourist areas that had contact with humans often turned around and started attacking humans. And there's a place in Australia called Fraser Island where there'd actually been a death and certainly serious incidents where dingoes had started acting just like the dingoes had at the Rock. And so I made an application to the Chief Minister and I said, I'm sorry, but we need to have a fourth inquest. And so back up to Darwin for the fourth inquest. This was the final thing that I had to do for the Chamberlains. And so going up there, the world media were there in throngs. And we just ended up with the most wonderful coroner. This was the first time we'd had a lady judicial officer, and she was wonderful. And so she had her own team look at the dingo attacks, and we agreed that since Azaria had disappeared, there had been 239 serious dingo attacks. And so she had no hesitation in finally rectifying the record again. And I can tell you, it was quite a moment. Her findings were broadcast all around the world. I had a minister that was actually in deepest, darkest Africa at the time, and he saw what she actually found was broadcast live to the country that he was in. And it was incredibly moving. When the coroner actually made her findings, she actually made the point of saying that whatever she did today wasn't going to bring back that little girl, Azaria. And then she broke down. And I can tell you, there wasn't a dry eye in that courtroom. And then knowing how important getting that record rectified, she had already arranged for the new death certificate to be issued. And so we went from the court and we held up that new death certificate, which again re-established not only the Chamberlain's innocence, but rectified it because it said that Azaria had been taken by a dingo. And it was only after that that now when you go around the parks in Australia, you will get these warnings. They only became a fixture in the national parks by the Chamberlains pursuing that cause. And it was just such a moment, I can tell you, it was just such a transformation for even the way the people and the public regarded Lindy. From that scene that we showed of holding up the death certificate, we walked from the court up the street. And as we walked up that street, a number of women just came from nowhere. And they came up and they hugged Lindy and they cried and they said, "We are so sorry." Just having that final judgment was the final piece of the jigsaw puzzle and just so important in completing the record. So sadly, Michael and Lindy's marriage didn't last. Lindy remarried and she married Rick, who's seated here, and that's two of her children. Regan, who was the little 4-year-old, is next to Lindy. Aidan, the 6-year-old, is in the middle, and he's there with his wife, Amber. And Lindy, I must say, is an impressive person. She is not vitriolic. She actually lectures on forgiveness. I have nothing but the highest respect for her and her new husband, Rick, who has very much the love and confidence of her children. Michael married this beautiful woman, Ingrid, and to his great credit, he wanted to make a contribution. He kept on with his study. He got a PhD, and he went into teaching, but he was troubled all the time by bullying, and he was really unemployable. Wherever he went, there was always someone who accused him of being a murderer or a criminal, and in the end, he really couldn't work in the field and had to come and work in administration. And then, I tell you, just the most tragic thing, his lovely wife, Ingrid, in 2010 had a catastrophic stroke. And she, from that moment, has been bedridden. And I have some contact with Ingrid. And in 2017, I saw on her Facebook page that she had recorded that Michael had gone into a hospital near where Cherie and I live, and very near to a golf course that I play on every Sunday. And I just woke up that morning and I said to Cherie, I haven't seen Michael for quite some time. I'm really feel I need to go and see him. So I'm going to have a round of golf, and I'm going to go and see Michael and see what's happening. Ingrid had posted that she thought he had gallstones, and certainly didn't think the situation was serious. So after my golf, I went into the hospital, and I got to see Michael, and I was quite shocked. I was quite shocked at the state of him, because Michael had always been an incredibly fit and strong person. And this was quite a contrast. And as I walked into his room, he was fast asleep. And I did not want to wake him up. And so I started writing a little note saying, sorry, I missed you, Mike. And I was just slipping that little piece of paper by his bedside table when he woke up. And he, of course, insisted that I stay. And I am so grateful to have had that time with Michael. We had the most wonderful time. And, the sad thing is, I could see that he was worried about something. He was uncertain about the future. And at the end of what was just a lovely visit with him, I really felt impressed to pray with him. And I said, Mike, would you like me to pray with you? And I'll never forget, there was no hesitation. And he just grabbed my hand and he just held onto that hand so tightly during the prayer. And I got up and I walked out, and I didn't ever see him again, but I heard him say, Stuart, you're a good man. And they're precious words to me, because almost soon after I left him, they took some biopsies. And the infection, which was a blood disease, went rampant into his spinal system, and all of his organs started shutting down. And I got the text the next morning that he had died during the night. And it's one of the things that just made me so angry about these things. And I remember at the eulogy that we had, that I gave at Avondale, as I was sitting down and writing that, it occurred to me that this fit young man, aspiring minister, when he set off on that journey and turned right from this photograph into Ayers Rock, he was 36 years of age. There were very few men that wouldn't have swapped place with Michael Chamberlain. He had a great career. He was making his way in the media, a beautiful wife, 2 lovely boys, and a beautiful little girl with a cherry on the top. And as we spoke that day, he said, Stuart, he said, from turning right into there, he said, my life just turned to custard. And what he was at 36 was exactly halfway through his life. Michael died aged 72, and it still makes me so angry to think of the life that has been robbed from Michael. Some really good things have happened. People say to me, wow, you know, it must have been a terrible toll on you and your family. And people say, how did you cope? Well, I can tell you, it has been an incredible journey. And I remember one of the many trips that we had on the way to the airport. My little 3-year-old James, who was born between the trial and the first appeal, was sitting in the back seat. And as we were on our way to the airport, we had the radio on, and on came John Denver. I'm leaving on a jet plane. Don't know when I'll be back again. And we suddenly heard our little boy crying. And Cherie turned around. She started crying. I started crying. And you don't get those moments back. But I think the toughest thing was certainly when our second boy was born. Because if you haven't watched Cherie's story, that's, I think, the most incredibly powerful story for our family out of all of this tragedy. Because James was born just after the trial, and Anthony was born during the Royal Commission. I said to Lindy, for goodness sake, Lindy, we only want 2 kids, so we don't want any more legal proceedings. But one of the things that I really made a matter of prayer was I was there for James's birth, the first boy, and I really wanted to be there for Anthony's birth. And I made that a real matter of prayer. And when I looked at the schedule, we had the schedule all worked out. That Anthony was going to be born just after it finished another 4 weeks in the court. I would leave Darwin, I'd come back to Sydney, and then, of course, Anthony was going to be born right on time, no dramas at all. And let me tell you, a month before that happened, I had the most grueling trip I've ever had. I had to fly with Barry Botcher. We went to the UK, we went to Germany, and then we started a tour of going around the experts in Scandinavia, and then back to the US, and then back home. And by the time I got home, my desk, where you saw in that photograph, was even worse than that. And I had to have all of these statements prepared and in the court. And I still remember it was a Wednesday that I got back, and I was sitting down at my desk, and I started to try to do some dictation. My whole body just started shaking. I don't know what time zone I was in, but it was the only time that I really felt physically beyond it. And I packed up and went home. And then it was on the Friday night. I was already planning to leave on that Sunday, and on the Friday night, Cherie went into labour. I had to drive her down to Sydney, where Anthony was born. And what happened, of course, was that he was a month early. He had not been following my plan. And not only was he early, but when he was born with a cleft condition, which was an incredible shock. So as thankful I was to be there at that birth, I can tell you the most despairing part for me was to know that I had no alternative, but I was to fly out on the Sunday, and I was going to be away for quite a few weeks. And I remember turning to that window and just saying, God, how can you do this to me? And then I turned back, and it was at that moment that Cherie had asked to have that little baby put into her arms, because she'd heard all the drama, but she didn't even know whether we had a boy or a girl. And she had that little baby in her arms. And when I turned back from the window, I saw that look. And later Cherie said to me, you know, the first time I saw Anthony, I said, no one's going to love that boy more than me. And I said, I know. I saw the look, and I just had that incredible peace that just came over me. And it is just unbelievable thing looking back on all of those things. But injustice is so damning. It's just such an awful thing for your society. And as I said, it affects so many people. And the funny thing about being a lawyer is that you don't get any recognition while you're losing. There are no civil medals for lawyers. And it was really only in that final 2012 that some really nice things happened. And that year I was awarded the New South Wales President's Medal for our services to law. And then even the greater honour was I was awarded the Order of Australia Medal. And I remember going down to receive this medal, and I can tell you, the pomp and the ceremony is incredible, and it's run like a military exercise, and they wheel you in, and you can see me standing here by the door, and the governor stands there, and they read out the reasons why you are being awarded this medal. And I can tell you, I felt a bit of a fraud because they were reading out things to me, but really all I did was my job. And as I was standing there, I was thinking, I'm not here because of what I did. I'm here because people stood up. This young lady was the first one. Without her making that phone call and alerting us to the problems and then teaching me how to interpret what was hieroglyphics to me, I wouldn't be standing here. And then, of course, Les Smith. Wow, what amazing work. That Royal Commission had teams of scientists duplicating what he did, and not once did any of the scientific work that he did get called into question. It was just absolutely brilliant work. And this man, Barry, wow, he died last year, and he was just a fellow who just never, ever gave up. It really affected his academic career, because I can tell you that when people stand up and actually start giving their time, as he did, it affects their academic career, and it affected him. But he was just one of those people who said, an injustice has been done, and I'm going to make it right. And what sort of person is Lindy? Let me tell you, as I said to you, I have the highest respect for Lindy. And I think Lindy really helped me realise who was really important to me. I mean, when I get one of these cases, I just go into the zone, as Cherie says. I just look for the solutions, and I just become so incredibly focused. But when I actually went back in reviewing my book and I read the letters that Lindy had written to me, I realised that every letter she wrote to me was addressed to Stuart, Cherie, and baby James. She arranged for her parents to write to me, to uphold me, to encourage me. Just beautiful, godly people. And when that last hearing came in Darwin, Lindy rang me and said, is Cherie coming? And I said, well, Lindy, I wasn't planning. I said, it's a pretty expensive trip just to get her up there. And she said, Stuart, she said, I insist that Cherie go up to Darwin with you, and I insist on paying. And I just thought that was just such a wonderful and gracious thing to do. So she really helped me realise that the real star was not Meryl, it was my beautiful wife, because she gave me the support that got me through this. And she was the rock for that family that we needed. And I just love her more every day. But I just thank you, but I need to finish on an amazing story. I told you how injustice affects different people. And on that day we walked into court, that tall fellow at the back was Greg Kavanagh, the legal aid solicitor that was assigned to our case. And he was the one who used to come and drive the Mazda car and take us to and from the court. He was the one who said, Stuart, when you get acquitted, get the acquittal, you know, what are we going to do? And so that was the Chariots of Fire idea. Well, Greg stayed on in Darwin. He actually became the coroner for the whole Northern Territory. And I tell you, if anyone would have had a more varied, demanding judicial experience, I couldn't imagine it. Well, last year I received a text from him. He stayed on in Darwin, as I said, and I've virtually retired on the Central Coast. And I got a text saying, Stuart, I've retired, I'd love to meet up, are you available? And I said, Greg, it'd be lovely. You know, so Cherie put on a lovely afternoon tea, and I thought things had gone really well. But he was a bit quiet. And after he left, I got this text. And the text said, Stuart, I'm so sorry I was such bad company. But he said, seeing you just brought back all of those awful memories. And he said, I would love to meet you again in different circumstances, and I promise I'll be better company. Well, one of the most amazing things that's happened, and I haven't got time to tell you all the ins and outs, but as it's turned out, I've now been invited by a number of cruise lines to come and tell this amazing story to people. And I can tell you the reactions that I get from people today is even more amazing, even though it's so long ago. And just after I got that text from Greg, I got an email from Cunard saying, Stuart, would you come on and give your talks, leaving Sydney and ending up in Darwin? So I thought, wow. So I immediately text Greg and I said, Greg, great news. I said, I've just accepted a lecturing position on the Queen Mary. I said, I'm going to be giving my talks. I'm going to be getting off in Darwin. And I'd love to meet you there and we can have the catch up and the time that you want. Immediately, I get a reply from him. Stuart, you are not going to believe this, but I'm a passenger on that ship. So I thought to myself, how can I use this? How can I help him? Because he obviously hasn't dealt with it. And so in the lectures, I can tell you, it is amazing. In the Queen Mary, it's probably got a lecture theatre of 1,200 people. And I take it over 3 days. And on the third day, they were queuing up to get in there. And I told the story of how Greg wanted to celebrate the victory. And I showed this photograph of the car and how we were going to walk out of there and raise our arms and go down and get into the car and wind the window down and press the play button and leave the court precincts in a triumphal, in triumph. And then, of course, I said to them, you're not going to believe this. But I said, that young man is actually in the theatre today. And I said, Greg, will you please stand? And so he stood. And I tell you, the atmosphere was amazing. And then I said to Greg, I've waited 40 years for this. I said, will you pay me the honour of escorting me from this theatre? The crowd were on their feet. I got off the stage, but just before I did, I hit the play button, and on came Chariots of Fire, and I walked down. He came out. He was crying. We were crying. Everyone was crying because that's what justice is. It's so important. And I just remember that story and urge you that when you see injustice, don't take a back seat. It is so important. And why do I give these talks? I give these talks because that is how I feel about it. It is so important. It's so important that when I finish the lectures with people, I give them a challenge. I give them a challenge and say, we are all here. We may have different belief systems. We may have different values. But the one thing that we all have today in common is the wonderful gift of life. Azaria was only 10 weeks when she lost her life. But her life mattered. Her life has been able to bring about important reforms in our judicial system. But most of all, it shows you that every life is important. And I leave them with the challenge I leave you. Your life is important. What are you doing about it? Thank you.
Wow. God has woven into our DNA, I believe, a desire for justice. I long for that day when all will be made right and when every person will know justice. And I thank God for people like Stuart Tipple who will give their life to that and who will stay at it at great cost until justice is seen. Thank you. Let's pray. Thank you, Lord. We thank you for the way this story ended, and we pray for many others who are in the midst of pain now, in the midst of a fight for justice. Might we, in small ways or large, do all we can to bring that about. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you again so much to Cherie. Thank you so much, Stuart. It's been a delight to have you here. You're now part of our Loma Linda community. We welcome you anytime, and we just sincerely appreciate it. As we end this evening, don't forget we have a watermelon feed outside. We're thankful you were here. God bless you, and we'll see you next Friday evening.